All right, so this is our book. All right, and what I'm going to do, what I'd like you to do, I'm going to start moving, moving up it a little bit, in other words. And let's take a look at the table of contents. I don't want to waste my time or your time on this, but just a couple things. We're going to go over a unit 0 right now. There's really hardly anything to it. Literally, we should be able to do that in, I would think, less than an hour, but we'll see. All right. Within this week, and by no later than next week, we're going to actually do unit 0, unit 1, and unit 2. All right. We should get all of unit 0 done today. It's setting up Node.js and the JavaScript engine. There's not really anything to do in lesson 0. Lesson 1 will literally take us about 5 minutes. And lesson 2, we'll just sit there and we'll write like the simplest JavaScript program we can. We'll just do like a console.log of hello world or something. That's it. So we'll get done with that. Then we'll start getting into stuff that, for lack of better words, sort of matters a little. One thing to realize as we start going through this, now, if you were in Mr. Smith's class, he'd probably be showing you how to do some of this stuff a little bit different than I am. I'm following the book pretty much, and he's not, which is totally fine. But, as you guess, there's always more than one way of doing the same thing. One of the reasons that I decided to do it the way that I'm doing, there's really two. One is, and I may have mentioned this to you before, that he's been working on this stuff probably for about a year longer than I am. I think he's got a better comfort level than I do, and I give him credit for that. But the other thing is, or the other reason, is if you run into a problem, I don't want to have you look at it, geez, I don't remember how to do that. And you look in the book and it's totally different. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong on that. I don't know. So we'll see as we go on. So we'll go into chapter 3, creating a module. Again, not hard. Lesson 4, you're going to create your own server, and it only takes about 4 or 5 lines of code. All right. Then handling incoming data, writing better routes. Then you'll have this capstone. By the end of the week, I want you to be working on that capstone now. Okay, so we'll do that. And then by next week, I want to get into unit 2, which is on Express.js. And so, in other words, by the end of next week at the latest, we're going to be through like 12 chapters in the book already, a third of the book. That might sound like, again, when you hear that, you might think, well, geez, that's, I don't know, that sounds like pretty damn much stuff, but it's really and truly, a lot of it is going to run just like that. It's not going to take long at all to go through it. All right, I'm going to move up, and I'm going to go up to the forward, which is page XV, and there's just one sentence in there that I want you, tell me when you're there. Okay, about halfway down on the page, it says the Node.js ecosystem is built around hundreds of thousands of published module packages and NPM. You see that? Mm-hmm. Literally, there are packages already built for you to do almost anything. And they even, I was watching this, I don't think it's in here, but I was watching this tape online where this guy was like, oh, Marvel superheroes. So he types that in, and boom, there's basically a module for Marvel superheroes. It's like almost anything you might want to do is in there. And it's literally, it's got hundreds of thousands of modules that you can download and use. It's not that you never have to write something yourself. Of course you do. But quite often what you're going to find is if you want to do something, you should look first and see if somebody else has already beat you to it, for lack of better words. All right, if you move up a few pages to about this book, and let me know when you get there. It's page XXI. All right. Again, I don't want to read to you. All right, but the bottom line is this. What you can do with Node.js is basically Node.js is about 10 years old. And you can now run JavaScript on the client or on the server. Now think of the advantage of doing that. If you've got somebody who already knows JavaScript, maybe doesn't know it that well, but knows it, and can do things with it on the client, it's the same language. So there's only one language. Okay, this weekend I don't know how I get these things, but occasionally I get sent stuff, and I got sent something from this place. I didn't realize it, to be honest with you. I thought it was a boot camp, but it looked interesting. So I watched a webinar. That's how I spent my exciting Saturday night. But I watched this webinar on it, and it's not a boot camp. It's a school. And they claim they're accredited. I'm still not sure who they're accredited through. But in 9 months, they take you from, it's basically the whole program is on JavaScript. All right. When you do the front end and the back end, they do everything with JavaScript. And the reason I'm telling you that is one of the things that they showed a slide in there, and it said that if you've got somebody who really knows JavaScript, it's not, now you don't need a front end developer and a back end developer. You can have the same person develop on both ends. All right. Now, down near the bottom of that page, it says defining the terms asynchronous and event-driven is important. And we're going to go back and look more at event-driven. Okay. But asynchronous means that, let's assume, for example, that I want to tell my program to do 5 things. Print this, so print something else, go out and find, go out and query this database that has 10 billion records in it and find me 7 records that meet this criteria, then print the result, all right, then tell me you're done. Make sense? Mm-hmm. If you did things synchronously, you'd print out the first thing, you'd print out the second thing, then you'd have to sit there and wait while the computer goes, and it may take just a few seconds, and it may not. All right? And you're waiting. So with asynchronous, what you can do is you can do those first 2 things. You can say, hey, go out and look and find me that information, find me those records if they exist, and once you do, let me know that you found them, and I'll go on. That's the big difference. All right. I've heard this defined in a lot of different ways. Some people say that human conversation is supposed to be synchronous. In other words, I'm supposed to talk. If I'm having a conversation with you, I stop, now I listen. You talk. You talk for a while, you stop, you listen, I talk. But I always say that asynchronous conversation is almost like the way it really is. Because I'll start talking, you'll interrupt me, etc., etc. You know what I'm saying? So the other thing they mention in here on the bottom of this page is they talk about event listeners. And we probably haven't done a good enough job of going through event listeners, so we are going to in the future. All right, just so you know that. So there will be times in here in this class where it'll seem like, oh, wait a minute, you're kind of regressing, you're going backwards. Yeah, we are going to go backwards. Because I want to make sure that there's certain concepts that you understand as well as you possibly can. All right. I underline a ton of stuff in here, but it's not, in the end, we're going to hit all of it, so it's not really that important. The big thing is, on the next page, on the very bottom of the page, there's a paragraph that starts with having an asynchronous runtime environment is great for web applications. And what they're basically saying is when you've got a web application, sometimes some of the stuff you do may take a while. And if it does, it's nice that you're able to not have the machine sit there and have to wait. I watched this thing a week or 2 ago online, and I actually thought it was really good. The guy was saying, okay, imagine you're going into a restaurant. Okay, you go into a restaurant, and not a McDonald's, but you go into let's just say a really nice restaurant. And the waiter comes up to you, and she or he says, can I help you? Yeah, and so you make your order. What do? Well, typically, they walk back into the kitchen to give the orders to the cook, right? Then they come out and they help the next person. That's being asynchronous. If they were synchronous, they would have to sit there and take your order, give it to the cook, and wait for the cook to bring it, to finish it, bring it out to you, then they go to the next table. Well, that's not how life usually works. All right? On the next page, on the very bottom of the page, they've got the goals of this book. All right? And they do mention in there that Node is not the only thing that you can use, but it's getting more and more powerful. And part of the reason is what I already mentioned to you, the fact that it's got all of these built-in modules that you can just add and just use without having to do any extra work. All right. Who should read this book on the next page? Well, you've got this. It says you should have some familiarity with JavaScript, with HTML, with CSS, and with a terminal or a command line. Everything you do from that command line, you can do from the git bash. So you've already done this. All right. Then the rest of this talks about how the book is split into 9 units. You can read that if you're interested. It's not that big a thing. There's about the author. Let's move right to section 0 then. Getting set up. And it probably won't happen, but if it does, if for some reason I'm going too fast or something doesn't make sense, just stop me. All right. The author says here we need to prepare our environment. So in this unit, you'll install all the tools you need to get going with Node.js. Well, 2 tools we already have. We've already got Git, right? You've got Git and GitHub, etc. on your machine. Okay. Well, and if you don't, we'll make sure. All right. And the other thing is you're going to need Node. Okay. So we're going to install that in just a couple minutes. So Lesson 0 talks about why this stuff is important, and Lesson 1 walks you through everything. Lesson 2, you write your first application, which literally is 1 line of code. All right. So let's move up to Lesson 0. It says here this lesson covers reviewing what you're going to learn. I'm not going to review that. Again, the bottom line is there are 9 units in this book. We're going to go over all of them except it's like unit 7 or 8, the one that's on using a chat. There's just not enough time, and that can get really squirrely, for lack of better words. All right. So they say what you're going to learn on the bottom of the page. The goal of this book is to teach you how to write web apps, okay, and to write web apps using Node.js. When we first do it, we're going to do it a certain way. I don't know if you remember this. I may have even given you this analogy in other classes before, but remember when you learned division, and you're dividing 1200 by 10, and you put all that stuff. Then over on the side, you put how many hundreds, etc. And then you learn short division after that. We're going to do that kind of the same way. We're going to do a long division first, then we're going to do a shorter division. Now the other thing is, again, when we get to the short division, there's different ways of doing the same thing. I'm not going to be so bold or brash as to say to you, you know what, the way I'm telling you is always going to be the best way, because it isn't. But it's going to be a way that either is in the book or that makes that makes sense because it's intuitive. All right. So again, then they review what unit 1, unit 2, etc. So we're in unit 0 right now. We're going to do unit 1, which is just basically getting to know Node. Then we're going to go into unit 2, which is on Express, which is what's called a web framework. And then we'll get to unit 3, but we won't get to unit 3 for a while. That's databases. We're gonna kind of go in and out of the book when we get to unit 3, because we're going to build an app with MySQL, MySQL that you've already used, but there's no MySQL in this book. There's literally 1 paragraph in the whole book. Then we're going to get into Mongo, and there's a whole big section in here on Mongo. So we're going to do both. All right. Okay, unit 4 is about Crud. You know what Crud is already. Create, read, update, delete. Unit 5 tells you how you can make Crud easier when you're using, 3 and 4 basically are going to tell you how you can use Crud and how you can make it easier by using what's called an object model. All right. All right, unit 5 talks about securing your data and building a login form. Well, what does that mean? It's going to talk about authorization and authentication. Authorization and authentication. Authentication, you know what authentication is. You've got to log in and a password, right? That's to authenticate you, okay? And once you're authenticated, then the system can tell what you're authorized to do. I've used this example before that I am authenticated when I log in the morning. I can go into Inside Rankin and see things you can't see. All right, but that said, there's things that are inside Rankin I can't see. Like I can't see the payroll stuff for everybody who works here. Interesting, but I can't do that kind of stuff. All right. Now, Unit 6, it says it introduces building an API, just so you know. As soon as we get into Unit 2, we're going to already be working with an API. Okay, so I mean, by the time we get there, it'll be like, well, we've already done this stuff. Yeah, that's true. Unit 7, again, we're going to skip. If we have time, we might go over it, but it's a live chat system. Unit 8, we're going to do that almost right away. We're going to use a free package called Heroku that you're going to download, not today, but that you're going to download, and you're going to be able to take and build your own application, throw it up on the internet for free. All right, so, all right. Next page, Understanding Node.js, page 5 in your book. Okay. As it says, it's a platform for interpreting JavaScript code and running applications. It's not a programming language. All right, it's a runtime environment. What Roland Dahl did, the guy who created this, was he took the engine that's used inside of Chrome, and he kind of supercharged it by adding code from the C++ programming language, and that's what ended up becoming Node. All right. Now, on the bottom of the page here, they talk about client side versus server side. You probably know this already. Client side, as it says, it's front end. Client. If you're going to go out to Amazon and buy something, you're the client, right? So you're the one who puts something in your address bar, Amazon.com. You're the one who goes out and puts stuff into your cart. You're the one who pays for it, etc. Now, when you're doing all that stuff, it's got to go out to the back end someplace. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the server side. Again, the advantage of using Node is you can write JavaScript on the server side. That's the biggest advantage there is to it, regardless of what anybody tells you. All right, so they've got a picture then on the next page that shows this. I don't know if we really have to go through it. Hopefully, is there anything in the picture that doesn't make sense? All right. Now, look under the picture, because this is important stuff, and this is the only time we're gonna talk about this. Node.js operates on an event loop. What does that mean? That means it just sits there all the time, 100% of the time, and looks for stuff to do. That's what an event loop is. It loops around and it looks for different events. Now, one thing about Node that most people don't understand is it only uses a single thread. Now, what does that mean? In most programming languages today, if you tell the computer to do something, it does it. And if you tell it to do something else, it goes and it creates a new process, and it gives the thread to that process. And then if you tell it to do something else, it does it again. So in other words, there'll be a new thread for everything you tell it to do. Node doesn't work like that. Node basically has, for almost everything, has just one thread. But what it does is it'll start doing something, and if it needs to stop, it'll say, okay, I'm going to stop. Then it'll start doing something else, and then when that original thing finishes, then it'll come back into the pecking order, so to speak. All right, and they do mention right underneath that, it says the process may sound counterintuitive, but most applications don't require computationally intensive tasks. All right, so on the very bottom of the page, as its name applies, the Node.js event loop cycles forever in a loop, and it listens for JavaScript events. You clicking a button, for example, that's a JavaScript event. And it doesn't have to be that, it can be a lot of things. So if you look on page 7, there is the event loop. And it looks a little weird, but look at it this way. We're on step 1 here. So it says the application prepares for the context of your application configurations. Stuff comes in there. So see where they've got task 1, task 2? Those are just different things that you want to do. So it starts doing those tasks. If there's a task in there that'll take some time, you write it and you include in there what's referred to as a callback. And callback, actually, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense. It says, call me back when you're done. That's basically what it's telling you to do. All right, so it goes on. And it queues stuff that it says, oh, that's still running. So it can go and service something else. It's almost like, I think they even say that in here. It's almost like when you've got somebody who's like an executive assistant. I remember the woman, I don't know, Pat, I think she retired, but she was the executive assistant for Stan, who at the time was the president of Rankin. All right. And her name is Pat Capps. And Pat was amazing. She was one of those kind of people who could do like 8 things at once. All right. Some people are like that. That's kind of what we're doing here. All right. We're telling the system basically to do that. All right. You can read this yourself. What's happening there isn't as important as you understanding that there's one thread and it's doing everything, basically. Now, that said, is that exactly true? Sometimes there's something where you need to give up control of the machine for something. Then it'll use another thread, but it does everything it can using a single thread. So again, the event loop, as they mentioned on the bottom of this page, handles a series of tasks, always working on one task at a time and using the computer's processing power to offload larger tasks on an as-needed type of basis. All right. On the next page, page 8 in blue here on the screen, and I guess it's in gray in the book, they talk about the difference between a process and a thread. All right. A process is basically, it's some kind of a unit of work. It's something that you have to do, okay? And a thread is typically the resources that are involved in making that process work, okay? All right, why learn to develop in Node.js on page 10? I already mentioned this to you. It's not on page 10. Page 9. They got this bulletized list. The big thing is one language. All right. The other thing is what you're going to notice already by probably tomorrow or Wednesday is what's called the Node Package Manager, or the NPM. That's that thing I told you that's got literally hundreds of thousands of modules that people have created that you can use. All right. It uses Google's V8 JavaScript interpreter. All right. It's got a strong development community. And it's interesting, this thing I watched over the weekend, this webinar I was telling you about, they mentioned that for full stack developers, so somebody who can do JavaScript on the front end, back end, etc., that their average starting wage is $75,000 a year. Not only that, he said the guy was given, now again, is it 100% true what I'm about to tell you? This is what this guy was saying, okay? That even though it's COVID, even though we're in tough times, there are still a lot of companies looking for people with these skills because they're still relatively new. Not only that, most people don't have them. All right. All right. Preparing yourself for this book. About 2/3 of the way down on that page, the author says, the goal of this book is to make you comfortable building a web application like the one that you're going to build throughout the book. The one you're going to build throughout the book is called Confetti Cuisine. It's for a mythical cooking place, where people can come in there and sign up and cook stuff together and do recipes, etc. And they have cooking classes and whatever. You're going to see that as you go on. All right. Most of the exercises in the book, it says are on the bottom of the page, ask you to use the terminal. Okay? And there's different ways that you can do this. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. All right. This should all be reviewed, but on page 11, right near the bottom, right before the summary, the author says, I'll remind you of the following items along the way, but you should keep them in mind as you progress through this book. You should remember stuff like this. JavaScript files have a .js extension. All right. The author uses the main application file that is used. We're not even talking about CSS. We're not talking HTML. But the main JavaScript file that the author will use is called main.js. Some things, sometimes you'll go online and people will call it app.js. Some will call it index.js. You really call it whatever you want. All right, but this is what the author uses. All right. I'm assuming you've got Chrome on your machine. Is that correct? Okay. Oh, let's see. That's it for that first lesson. Now, let's stop for a second. I'm going to literally